Hi, I'm Mayor Marty Walsh, and I want to thank Toy Burton and DeeDee's Cry for the incredible work they do in the Boston community all year long. And I want to thank all of them for organizing this event today. Mental health is just as important as physical health, and seeking and accepting help is a sign of strength. That's especially true right now. The pandemic has added a whole new set of challenges to everyday life. For people who were struggling before, it can even be harder to manage this added weight. I'm here to tell you it's okay to feel fear and anxiety. We'll feel that for some time. This is an important time to take care of yourself. We're all handling this the best we can. And the only thing we can do is take one day at a time. If you need someone to talk to, you have options. You can call your healthcare provider to get set up with a telehealth counselor. Or you can call 311 at the city, our hotline, to get connected to anonymous counseling over the phone. I know that DeeDee's Cry is going to share some important resources with you today. I want to thank the panelists for coming together and sharing their stories. In times like these, it's important to support one another and find ways to connect. I wish you all the very best, and I thank you for creating a positive change in our community.
And I want to thank Mayor Marty Walsh. Welcome everyone out there in Facebook land. You're live right now on Facebook with us at Black Mental Health and Media Matters. My name is Robin Saunders, and we're going to talk about today the realm of media, which, as we all know, comes in so many different forms. Back in the day when I grew up, it was just TV or radio. And now we have so many different platforms. We have social media, satellite TV, cable TV, blogs, plug this in, take that out, whatever. We got so many different options out there. So tonight we're going to talk about how we as Black people deal with media and how media probably deals with us. But before we do that, let's thank our sponsors for the day or for the evening. Up first, we'd like to thank Louis D. Brown Peace Institute, also Eastern Bank and the Boston Foundation for supporting DeeDee's Cry, which is hosting this event right now. We want to thank Callaway Graphics for the flyer, which they produced. Also, Roxbury Unity Parade, which this year, 2020, will be in a motorcade, and we'll give you more information about that. So before we start with our guests and our family tonight, let's hear from Toy Burton.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to change this to speaker view. My name is Toy Burton, and I am the founder and executive director of DeeDee's Cry Suicide Prevention and Family Support. DeeDee's Cry is named after my sister, Denita Shayne Morris, who died by suicide at the age of 23 back in 1986. I started DeeDee's Cry in 2017 after I noticed that organizations that focus on mental health and suicide prevention really didn't do the events or outreach in communities of color. So because of their lack of racial equity, I started DeeDee's Cry specifically for communities of color and especially the Black community. And I would like to turn it over to Dr. Brandy Brooks, who will be our moderator this evening.
Before we do that, let me just introduce the panelists real quick.
Yes, please.
Okay. That's all right. Since we're talking about media, we have two, and I'm saying panelists, but actually mean family members for the night that are dealing with media in their professional lives. We have, actually three media professionals. We'll start with Jimmy Hills. He's a proud graduate of Madison Park High School. He honed his community building skills while at UMass Boston and recently graduated from the nonprofit management leadership certificate program at BU Questrom School of Business. In 2018, because of a death of a young man who was like a nephew to Jimmy, he began advocating on social media to convene residents and city leaders with the under the hashtag of We Need to Know, and I'm sure you've seen that program. Then this year, March 2020, in response to COVID-19 and how it affects Black and Brown communities everywhere, and especially here in Boston, Jimmy created his online talk show, Java with Jimmy. And that's another hashtag to know. And that also, because of his, all of his information giving and professionalism, he is now DeeDee's Cry's digital director. We also have tonight Crystal Haynes. She's an Emmy Award-winning journalist with over 15 years of broadcast experience. Her Priced Out series on Boston 25 channel has been nominated with the Northeast Regional Emmy Award and focuses on exposing the desperate impact of housing crises in Massachusetts. She's an events working group lead on the Arlington Human Rights Commission, member of the Boston Association of Black Journalists, NAACP, and is a trained facilitator in gender-based violence prevention and incidents in racism through NU's Center for Sport and Society. And she's also an alum of mine since I'm also an NU grad. Crystal grew up in Springfield and holds a BS in broadcast journalism from Emerson College, a master's degree in media advocacy from Northeastern University, College of Arts, Media, and Design. And we also have with us today, Keri D. Singleton. He's the president of, he's the president of Intrigue Magazine, and he hosts Keri's Korner radio show for over 7 years. He's an award-winning author, radio host, and Roxbury native. Keri has been in the entertainment business for many years, but he's also dedicated to serving the community and giving inspiration to others through his work, and being both a recipient and also giving of uplifting and productive energy. He's an ally to those who are fellow homicide survivors. Keri will always speak out against urban violence in the cities nationwide, and of course here in Boston. Now that we've introduced our family, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Brandy Brooks.
Thanks, Robin. Thanks for that introduction. And I'd just like to say, go Huskies, NU grad here too. Hey everyone, my name is Dr. Brandy Brooks. For the past 15 years, I've worked in the public health, mental health space, first as a contract manager, then as a trainer, and now as an advocate. Last year, I also received my doctorate in education from UMass Lowell campus. Before we get started, I always like to begin any talk around topics of mental health, around topics of depression, around topics of suicidality, with a little bit of disclaimer of sorts. So one thing I want to say is some of the things that may be discussed over the next hour, hour and a half, it may cause some thoughts, some emotions, some feelings to bubble to the surface for you. And if that occurs, please step away from your phone, step away from your computer, take a moment, take a breath, take a pause, and then come back and join us. Because self-care, as we'll highlight tonight, is so important. We must take care of ourselves. We must be intentional about it. We must be purposeful about it. And especially now, especially on, a weekend like this weekend, we lose 2 civil rights pioneers and other things going on. We need to take care of ourselves and continue to take care of ourselves. Additionally, one thing I want to highlight is that while the focus today will be on media, the impact of media as a producer, as a consumer, and mental health, I don't want to discount the importance of us also understanding that conversations around mental health are also conversations about physical health, are also conversations about financial health, also conversations about your how do I want to put this? Especially in today's context, it's a conversation about racism. It's a conversation about depression. It's a conversation about oppression. It's a conversation about white privilege. It's all those things wrapped up. Tonight, we'll focus on media because we have such great panelists here. And I do want to thank them for their time and energy being here. And I want to thank Toy, before we get started, for starting DeeDee's Cry and connecting us to all this work and bringing and elevating these conversations. And so I don't want to start this conversation tonight with too much data, too much statistics, or anything like that, because we have such great panelists. So I kind of want to get right to them and right to their stories. So what I'd like to do is ask each of the panelists if you could share your story of how you came to your current position, your current space in media. How did you come, James, how did you come to creating Java with Jimmy, Keri in terms of your radio career, and Crystal in terms of your work and Emmy award-winning work? How did you come into that work and that space? And then also, if you could highlight as you're sharing your story, why do you feel that you elevating Black mental health is so important to do in the spaces that you are in? And so I'd like to start with Keri. Keri, if you could share who you are, how did you come to, being on the radio and other things that you do? And then again, why is it you feel that the elevation of Black mental health is so important in the spaces in which you operate?
Okay, well, can you hear me? Okay. First, I want to, of course, thank Toy for inviting me to be a part of this incredibly important discussion. Dr. Brandy and Robin, kudos to you two as well. Thank you so much for the awesome introductions and everything that you guys do. Keri D. Singleton, I'm originally from Roxbury, born and raised in Roxbury. I have my Roxbury Unity Parade t-shirt for 2020. I get one every year done new. This one is representing the L, and on the back it says, welcome to Nubian Square. Unfortunately, because of COVID, I won't be able to make it to the parade this year, but I definitely look forward to being arm in arm with everybody next year. I began my career in the 90s in Boston as a artist manager. I managed a couple of recording artists, or aspiring recording artists, I should say. I also had an internship at WILD at the same time. And I connected with a lot of New York promoters at a very young age, like right out of high school. I always knew that I wanted to pursue my career and my life, for that matter, in New York. And in 1996, only a couple of months after my father was murdered in Grove Hall, I decided that that was kind of the catalyst that I needed personally to move, to leave the nest, to leave my mother's house, and to make that leap. So in September of 1996, I moved to New York City. Initially, I was working for a record label, Palm Tree Records. I was also working for Arista Records. So we promoted Usher's first album, TLC's first album, Tony Braxton's first album. A lot of those, early New Jack Swing records that were on the Face label and the Arista label and the Rowdy Records label. I then went through a whole bunch of transitionary periods as I was working for Palm Tree, and Palm Tree was primarily a reggae record label. So we were doing the Shaggy Boombastic album and Patra, Little Vicious, a lot of that stuff. So as you know, in the 90s, dancehall reggae became very big and fizzled out very quickly, particularly in 97. And so then I had to get a real job, and I was a bike messenger without a bike in Manhattan in the cold. Didn't like it, but I wanted to stay in New York City, so I did what I had to do. Whatever. Over the years, it wasn't easy, but finally in 2013, I started the Keri's Korner radio show. Basically, I was a guest, on somebody else's radio show, and my mouth. Those of you that know me know that I have a mouth, Jimmy and Toy. My mouth actually earned me my own radio show, and it's just been a great adventure from there. I mean, the Keri's Korner radio show has been on the air over 7 years. We cater to old school R&B music for the most part. So we've had Eddie Levert Sr. on the show. The late Kashif was on the show. We've had everybody from Melissa Morgan to Melba Moore to Adina Howard to you name it. We've had great guests, including Toy on the show. And so it's been a pretty great ride. I also am the president of Intrigue Magazine, which is pretty much, I guess maybe like an Ebony sort of. We focus on adult contemporary music, fashion. We don't do gossip columns. We focus on uplifting the persons that we do stories about, whether they be recording artists, models, etc. And of course, we support the Roxbury Unity Day Parade and DeeDee's Cry as well. So that's been my journey, the edited version, the extremely edited version. And I'm just glad to be here to be a part of this really, really important discussion. I mean, we're in a really, really trivial time, with the pandemic, with I'm not going to say race relations because that's not anything new. But I guess the overexposure of our plight as people of color in this country is finally coming to a head. And then, of course, the election's coming up. And I think, and I had a discussion with this last weekend with some friends of mine. I think that, and I don't want to be pessimistic, guys, but to be honest, I think that 2020's worst is yet to come, just because you think about if the Republican candidate wins, what that's going to do for our country. If the Republican candidate does not win, how his supporters may in fact react to inflame an already volatile situation in the country. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's what you just said right there, how you end it. That's a conversation that'll be like another 2.5 hours. But one thing I want to do, Keri, if you could, is speak to, do you use your platform to elevate Black mental health? So I know you said you've had a lot of artists on, but have you done any segments around Black mental health before I then move on to Crystal?
Yeah, traditionally over the past 7 years, Dr. Brandy, what we would do is the first show of every year, because this show is generally very lighthearted, the first show of every year is dedicated to a quote unquote serious topic. And so we've done everything from domestic violence to suicide prevention, things of that nature. I think one of the things about us as a community is that, we break a leg, we're running to the hospital, right? Mm-hmm. Mental health, we kind of feel like, it's something that either isn't important or something that we should keep at the dinner table in the house. And so with the radio show, we've definitely tried to, utilize that platform to give people an opportunity to voice whatever it is that's on their mind, especially where it pertains to mental health.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Keri. Welcome this evening. So now I'd like to turn it over to Crystal Haynes. So Crystal, if you could introduce yourself to the audience and speak to kind of, your experiences and then how you've used your platform to elevate Black mental health.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brandy. I'm Crystal Haynes. I've been a reporter at Channel 25 for 9 years this July. So I've been in the Boston area for a long time. I'm from Springfield, Massachusetts. I started my career actually at the end of an internship back at home, trying to finish college as quickly as possible because I paid for it on my own. So I needed to get through fast enough because those college bills were mounting. And 5 people quit in one day. And I was in the newsroom, ready, willing, and able to take on the job as an assignment desk editor. So I actually started my career while finishing my last year of college, and I moved up from producer to reporter, and then moved on to Connecticut, and then now I've been here in Boston again for 9 years. So I think my trajectory has always been one that I have planned out carefully. In 3rd grade, we had an assignment where we had to watch the 6 o'clock news every night and write a 100-word summary, and I was just enamored. I was mesmerized by the folks that were able to just tell facts, because I was that kid that was saying, did you know this and did you know that? So I was like, people get paid for this? I want to do that. And so my family tells a story about one Thanksgiving where I stood up and made an announcement in 3rd grade that I was going to be a journalist. And ever since then, I haven't been anything else. So it's been really important to me to be able to represent the underrepresented, because I grew up with a single mom who suffered from what's now called bipolar 3, but back then was manic depression, and she was misdiagnosed and mismedicated many times. And she was a single mom of 2 kids, and suffered other ailments. So we were on welfare, and then disability, and then welfare again. And so I understood that my mother wasn't being listened to in her doctor's offices, and my sister and I weren't being listened to in our inner city schools. And that was a really frustrating point for me as a kid. And I knew that in the newspaper, they print your work. And I became a teen journalist on the enlisted section, which is the teen section in the Springfield Union News and Sunday Republican, which is now Mass Live. And then that really built the foundations for my trajectory in journalism. And I never looked back. In Boston, I think it's been really important for me to elevate these underrepresented voices, suppressed voices, voices that aren't normally heard, and make them part of the mainstream conversation. I think a lot of times we talk about including people of color, or including people who may not always be represented in the media as some sort of tokenism. But if we normalize our lived experience, then it has to be listened to, and it has to be addressed on all levels. And I really believe that local TV is a gateway to that. And I think when we're in your living rooms every single day, and you normalize the Black experience, the person of color experience, normalize that mental health and mental illness are real things, maternal mortality among people of color are real things that everyday people experience every single day, and you bring that into the dinner table as people are listening to their story about the coronavirus numbers, they're listening to economy numbers, they're listening to about that softball game that happened in a suburban town. When we interject those messages into our everyday lives, I think that's when we start to address them, and that's when we start to have those conversations that will ultimately, in my hope, dismantle these systems that are making us sick, and that are creating the stigmas that prevent people of color from seeking healthcare on all levels. And so that's how I try to use my platform. I pitch stories in our news meeting every single day that elevate voices of color, that elevate parts of the Black experience, and make them as part of the normal news day. We need to be covering these stories, and it doesn't have to be a special framework. It's just like at 5:15, we're going to talk about Black maternal mortality. Just like at 4:15, we're going to talk about the Great Cape Escape. And so I think that's the way to use the platform that I've had. And I think that it's so important to be part of that normalized conversations, because as someone who has walked into many, 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 many newsrooms as the only person of color, the only woman of color, and walk into a space where people don't understand what it took to show up. And I think we discount that, and the weathering effect that many scholars like yourself, Dr. Brandy, have written about, the weathering effect of people of color, that how that impacts our physical health, our emotional health, our mental health, and how we bring that into all the spaces we walk into the world. And so I think that that's so important that we normalize conversations like these. And I hope to do that every day in my work in the news.
Thank you so much for that. James, last but not least, if you could introduce yourself and talk about your platform, how you got to where you are, and then how you elevate the topic of Black mental health in your work.
Dr. Brandy, thank you so much. Toy, thank you for the invitation. It's interesting morphing from host to panelist, and but I just have to say that I'm kind of like honored and a little starstruck, and like, wow, I'm on a panel. I want to say Dr. Crystal Haynes, like Dr. Brandy Brooks, but it is an honor to be on this panel with all of you. But Dr. Crystal Haynes, I've seen you. And I've seen the stories that you raise and if we could just keep it simple, the hood. And I agree with so much of what you're saying. So I am not a journalist. I am not a media personality. I am a young man who found himself realizing that the governor had suggested that we stay home. And on March 24th, I grabbed a cup of coffee and I sat here at my computer and talked with folks about that decision and everything that that brought to the table as far as mental health. So in the origin, Dr. Brandy, to kind of cut to the end of your question, the root, or the root, as the old folks would say, of this platform is heavily rooted in mental health and raising awareness, and largely due to Toy and her engaging me to come on. I was having, so the other hashtag, We Need to Know, was a culmination of years of work of trying to bring accountability and awareness and liaising between those who are victims or survivors of homicide and dealing with trauma and calling for municipal accountability. And it was a culmination at a tragic time in my life. And so I was very raw in We Need to Know. And Java with Jimmy is more of a engaging 9 a.m. in the morning. You know, We Need to Know, I'm working on one right now. That's like a Wednesday night at 9 o'clock, because that's the hardcore community piece. So anyway, was having coffee that day, and my mother, I looked today and I saw the comment. She said, well, will you be here tomorrow? And I was like, yes. And 116 days later, every single day, we are on the air, if you will. And we focus, Dr. Brandy, we focus on Mental Health Mondays. We promote hashtags and have branding around intentional self-care. We talk about mental illness. We work to demystify going to lay on someone's Black couch, or in this day, sitting in a Black chair and talking to someone on Zoom. We've talked about sort of the dating experience of finding the right therapist. It's like a dating experience because you have to find the right one. And we've, Crystal, you talked about climate. I was supposed to do a presentation for a corporation, and I framed it around creating a climate of equity. And I looked at different ways that you can sort of, when you talked about weatherized and how, media impacts us. So to shut things up and take down, I am intentional on this platform to inform and educate and share resource information heavily. Well, it used to be heavily, but I do a lot of bantering around Boston Poly, Mass Poly, Suffolk Poly, Mass 7 Poly, because I'm politically engaged. And I also am intentional about ensuring qualified immunity, that our community is heavily engaged in getting information and resources. So that's sort of my spiel, Dr. Brandy.
Well, thank you everyone for your wonderful introductions. One of the things that I heard in some of your comments, some of your talks, particularly Crystal, when you mentioned stigma and the stigma around mental health, the stigma around seeking help. Keri, you even mentioned some of that earlier with you too. And one of the reasons for these conversations, one of the reasons for these dialogues is because Toy, through DeeDee's Cry, believes that, when you have conversation and when you engage openly and honestly, you create more education, you create more awareness, and you destigmatize the topic. Like you create a space where people feel safe to share their pain, their traumas, all those things. And I wonder if you, all the panelists, could speak to what extent do you feel the media helps to perpetuate these stigmas, or is working to break those stigmas? And whether you can provide any examples from your own experiences of the stigma that we see around mental health and mental wellness. And so I'll go, Keri, if you would, I'll go to you first. Keri, if you'll comment on that.
Sure. So I feel like in Western civilization, for lack of a better term, we're almost conditioned to feel that we're independent. As individuals, we're islands, which is anything but the truth. As human beings, we are, naturally, we are creatures of community. But I think that, you know, in the society that we've all grown up in, it is it's very taboo, really, to, you know, to spill the beans on whatever it is that's going on with you. You know, whether you're dealing with, you know, sexual abuse, physical abuse, your sexuality, whatever, all of the topics that, you know, all of us basically deal with, you know, that we're encouraged to, you know, man up, if particularly for Black men. I'm speaking on behalf of, you know, men of color. You know, we're expected to be tough. We're expected to just, you know, grab life by the, you know, and just be, you know, have strong backbones. Now, within the Black community, the stigma is even deeper. You know, I mean, we come from a community where, you know, don't tell those neighbors what happened in this house. You know, and I mean, it's interesting how mental health is so important and yet so overlooked, especially like I said, in the Black community. I feel like, you know, back in the '60s, I believe it's the '60s. Correct me if I'm wrong. You know, when states across the nation closed their mental health hospitals. You know, again, I grew up in Boston, and I remember being young in the early '80s, and wondering why were all these massive buildings on River Street and in Franklin Park. What were these buildings? I always wondered, why are they closed and weeds growing and everything. My mother would explain to me, oh, those were, you know, the mental health hospitals. I'm sure she used a more colorful term, you know, but she said, you know, that's where people, you know, that had mental health issues. Again, I'm being politically correct. That's where they were housed. You know, so nationwide, all of these, you know, mental health facilities, you know, they closed. And what happened, you know, basically people that, you know, were in these facilities, which from what I always understood, they weren't necessarily the best facilities in the first place for persons that, you know, dealt with certain issues that probably weren't diagnosed right. At any rate, jail or homeless shelters. That basically was the trajectory for persons that were formerly housed in these buildings. So now you see that our jails nationally and our streets / homeless shelters and are the homes for the severely
And
for people that
and
severely deal with.
Keri, I wonder if in kind of summarizing, do you feel like the media helped with that stigma or that representation? Because one thing when I talk to my class about media, because I teach political science at Bunker Hill, one quote that I love is Richard Cohen, and he says, the media doesn't tell us what to think, but it does tell us what to think about.
Right.
So I wonder, when you're talking about, you know, your mom's description of individuals and things like that, like, do you think the media at that time and now, do you think it helps to perpetuate these stigmas? Or do you see at least kernels of the media helping to destigmatize and helping people seek help if they are in trouble, if they are struggling? Do you see that happening, or do you see more of the other?
No, absolutely, and you're right. I should bring it back. I tend to be long-winded on subjects I'm passionate about.
It's okay.
I apologize, but yeah, no, the media definitely perpetuates a lot of the things that we believe in general in society, and undoubtedly, you know, the notion that mental health is just not as important as physical health, or the notion that mental health can be cured with a simple sit down on a couch, or worse, a medicine. You know what I mean? Like, that's definitely perpetuated in the commercials that you see. You know, if you're depressed, take this pill. If you're, you know, if you're dealing with this ailment, a non-physical ailment, and take that medication. You know what I mean? I feel like we were bombarded with that type of television script all the time.
Mhm. James, I wonder if I could go to you for a second and hear kind of in your role, because you said you started the show, what is it, 117 days ago?
116, yeah.
Okay, 116 days ago. And so before then, you were just a consumer of the media. Now you are a provider. And so, yes, you are a provider of media. Okay. Take the mantle, wear it. Take your crown, put it on. So, one of the things, though, is whether you can speak to kind of this idea of stigma, destigmatizing, and what role you feel the media has played in that, in terms of either perpetuating the stigma or really helping people, especially now, seek help and reach out if they are struggling and if they are in pain.
So first of all, let's name, and you see I struggle with this embracing of media, whatever, but let's just name what the stigma is. And specifically, I'm a Black male, and Keri was talking about it. And in the climate of where we are now is primarily sparked. And we got the whole Black Lives Matter org, movement, words, thing that's going on. But in its origin, it was a hashtag in response to the killing of Black males by police. And the stigma that you refer to, let's just name some of what it is. It's not 9, so I'll keep it light, is that we are barbaric, that we're violent, that we're sexually predatory, that we have no self-control, and that we are more prone to quick self-satisfaction versus long-term planning for better improvement of the quality of lives. Let's just name what that stigma is. Yes, the media does perpetuate it. It perpetuates it through the news. It, in some means, perpetuates it also in covering what ails us through police brutality. But every time, as you say, we see that image, not only are we traumatized, but those that aren't for us kind of are, in a sense, empowered, or see, there they go again. That's right, da 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 da. Given the climate of what we have down in DC on 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. So the other piece is, and I'm not just going to say, though the racism and though the systemic oppression that is often perpetuated through the media, and I'm sure Crystal Haynes can talk to this more, but we understand that there are a major 3 sort of communication entities that fall under, we have, it used to be like Viacom, Universal, and then they merged. And then, so there's maybe 2 or 3 now major sort of media umbrellas that all media sort of falls under: news, music, social media. We haven't even intentionally talked about that yet. So social media definitely perpetuates stigma around how we are perceived. And then to go specifically to your question around a stigma around mental health, I would say the general media does maybe not perpetuate a stigma, but they instantaneously are trying to get everybody to delve into psychopharmacology without good analysis, without proper psychopharmacology evaluation every 6 months to see if your levels are okay. So the media, I think for me, what stands out in that question is the stigma may not be as perpetuated. I think specifically to sort of our media, we are actually in being more intentional about demystifying mental health and having it addressed. So kind of a 2-pronged answer. And then the last piece I will say is that we can't deny that we contribute in our media format through music, and this, be that, shake that. It used to be, you turn BET at least used to have some positive music, and it got about 15 years ago, I got tired of turning the TV on and looking at 2 basketballs up between a thong. You know what I'm saying? So there's all type of things that the media perpetuates, and it does contribute to our need to maintain mental health, but I think we can do better in some outlets in being intentional about addressing our mental illness. And then how do we help secure and perpetuate mental health. We got, what's her name, Dr. Iviana, and then, you know, I can't remember her name, so sorry, but yeah.
Are you talking about Ayanna Van Zant?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. All right.
I
don't
talked
wanna...
to Dr. Brandy. I don't know her.
Look, Dr. Ayanna Van Zant, she big time. She Oprah. But, you know, we network. But I'd like for Crystal to respond to the question of, you know, to what extent are you seeing in the spaces in which you operate the stigma being perpetuated, or you having to advocate more for certain stories and things like that? So I don't know if you can speak to that in terms of your professional experience and some of the stigmas that you've seen or even been asked to report on. Or, you know, some of the things that you try to do in your work to destigmatize mental health and mental wellness.
Well, I mean, that would be a gift if I was asked to report on it. But most of the time I don't ask for permission. But I think when we're talking about the media, I think we have to sort of think about it in silos. I think news perpetuates, is very good at showing you statistics, but no people when we talk about mental health. Or the mental health conversation is around a tragic event, a shooting, a mass shooting, a mass incarceration. And then we're talking about mental health through the lens of tragedy. And so I think that then becomes a problem. I think when we're talking about media as a whole, the way we consume it, I think the shows that we really hold up as traditional in our community, in the communities of color, like The Cosby Show, or I think of Family Matters, I think of Martin. All of these places perpetuate the stereotype of Black people or Black women hold it down. They don't have mental health issues because we're the strong, sassy, snap your neck at any issue that's going to happen. And then that gets perpetuated in our communities and reinforces the idea that Black people as a monolith, which we know is not true, but Black people as a monolith handle struggle, handle strife, throw it on our back, and we continue to achieve. But the reality is that we are being broken down generation by generation, and that's a way of silencing us by creating these stereotypes and these archetypes in media where nothing can touch us. And that's not the way we live our lives, because we know that trauma is generational and has been for over 400 years in the United States, and we suffer in silence. So I think when we're talking about the mainstream media, our examples are flawed because we aren't creating characters, we aren't creating scripts, we aren't creating TV shows that show the reality of the Black experience as we deal with trauma. A lot of times you can watch Friends, or you can watch another show, The Seinfeld, and they're like, oh, I just came from my therapist, and it becomes a funny storyline. But there are very few, if any, Black characters that you can name that are joking about going to the therapist and having that be a normalized conversation. I think of episodes of Martin where he made fun of characters that were going to the therapist. And then we crack those jokes at our dinner tables. We crack those jokes, at a cookout. We crack those jokes in the neighborhood, but we don't know that we have been fed a poison of a stereotype of what Blackness is supposed to look like. And then we feed that to our children, and we don't normalize therapy, and we don't normalize saying, I'm not okay today. And I think, and I know that specifically you wanted to talk about how the media and the news deals with it, but I do want to touch really quickly on the social media piece and this idea of self-care. Self-care, going to a spa, is a Band-Aid on an open wound if you are dealing with generational trauma or abuse, or dealing with any sort of terrible situation that's happened in your life, or tweeting about how good you felt buying an outfit, when really you need to look into yourself about you're spending the money to cover up an issue where you felt like you came from poverty. You felt like you can spend this money now, but really being hungry is a form of trauma, and having to figure out how to budget can be a form of trauma if the situation is life and death. And that's not what we talk about, right? When we talk about Black self-care. So I think we have to be so careful about the language because words matter. I think we have to talk about who we lift up in our media messaging, in our shows that we want to talk about, like, traditional things that happen, things that make us feel good in our community. And I think in the news, we need to talk about mental health outside of when someone kills someone or when someone abuses someone or when someone commits a crime.
Yeah, and one of the things you highlighted and echoed, we definitely see in the research in terms of the social media lens, because a lot of the research now says, we're so tethered to our phones, to our computers and things like that, particularly now with COVID and people having to work from home and whatnot, and how the consumption of media can be positive on some respects because you have more information at your fingertips, those types of things. It can also be very negative too, because it creates like this whataboutism. It creates this idea of when I scroll through my Facebook or Instagram feed, everyone is, well, now, not now, but they're on vacation. Their kids are acting, their beds are made and everybody's smiling and everything looks great. And everybody paints that picture of great. And everybody posts those pictures for likes. They post those pictures for comments. And then what happens if you don't get those likes? You don't get those comments. You don't get the gratification and the verification of, whatever image you put up. And that can lead to individuals' mental health breaking down. And then there's some conversation too about, how are the social media platforms in terms of how are they helping to support people who post things that can be negative, things that can be triggering, things that can be racist, things that can't, and so there's a lot of conversation about that. And again, I go back to that comment of Richard Cohen saying, the media does not tell us what to think, but it does tell us what to think about. And so whether we look at Martin or Cosby Show or some of those other things, it tells us what we should be thinking about mental health or, Black family structure and other things. And I know James had a comment he'd like to make or a thought. So I go to you, James, and then I'll come back and go to Keri.
So to first of all, Crystal preached. I could have laid out on the floor under a white sheet. The piece about social media, and thank you for bringing us back, because I had perceived the question that Brandy asked through sort of an intentionality and macro, and you spoke to it differently as far as those characters. I sat here and thought you were saying a Mark, but Mr. Curry, Family Matters, and all of them, they were good, but as you said, they did not address some real issues. And I think today shows like Blackish and a couple of others like them are trying, but they're still subject to the systemic oppression within that vein. The thing I wanted to say, Dr. Brandy, about social media is that not only the big, sort of on TV media is influential, but from a different vein of what you were saying about social media, and we're talking in the vein of mental health matters and Black mental health matters, social media is a huge contributor in violence, which causes trauma. There's the stigma of the persona that I'm that dude and whatnot. I'm going to get you when I'm the hardest on social media. And then when it comes time, or winter's over or COVID is over, and let's speak to that real quick. Social media kind of contributed to some of us that look like us here on camera thinking we can't get it. So we weren't paying attention. So I think that generally in media, there is definitely an influence, but in social media, and that's even generational. I know you're giving it to Keri, but he's been in a little bit longer. And I think generationally, how it's morphing our society and morals and values and contributing to shaping them is interesting.
Yeah, there's so much research on everything you just touched upon. A lot of research looking at how we communicate and how social media has contributed to that, or really led to the kind of the destruction of communication, just in terms of picking up a phone and calling, and how important those pieces are. And the one thing with social media, particularly now, that is so important is, you know, the aspect that people can hide behind a screen sometimes can be positive for some, but a lot of the research is saying it can also be negative and destabilizing, because we're already, in a sense, isolated with COVID and having to social distance and things like that. I mean, I was just, before this came on, watching a commercial about, you know, one of the things that people said they want to do most once they're able to get out of their homes is not travel, not do anything. It's just to connect with other people and be able to hug someone, you know, give a dap, say hello. And so that connection piece is so important too, in terms of how we connect to one another. And so I'd like to go to Keri here when we're talking about kind of social media and what you're seeing, and particularly with this concept of isolation. Do you think it, Keri, what you're seeing in terms of your show, maybe callers and things like that, do you think in terms of how people are communicating with media now, is it something that increases people's sense of community, people's sense of togetherness? Because again, that helps with mental health. Or do you think in some respects, social media and some of the forms that we are using creates further isolation?
I think there's some duality, Dr. Brandy, in that,
Mm-hmm.
you know, with us now being forced to, so for example, my radio show now does music only shows. We pre-record every week, no interviews. We're no longer recording out of the studio. They're just all music pre-recorded shows. So the ability to interact with guests, the ability to take photographs and have the whole Keri's Corner Radio show experience has been eliminated. You know, now we're just basically broadcasting music. Again, like you said, there's this whole need for a human connection. I went to a barbecue in Queens last Sunday, and you know, I had to think before I went to extend a hug to a person. It was a small gathering, you know. So there's that definite need, you know, that human need for us to want to, you know, to embrace each other both physically and emotionally. Social media has become the new way to communicate, you know, period. I haven't even seen my mother up in Boston in 7 months. You know, the only way that we can communicate is through the phone. So it's a double-edged sword. I think that, you know, in terms of social media, you know, thank God we have it, because, you know, think about had this happened in the 90s or the 80s. You know what I mean? Like if we had, you know, been subjugated to staying in the house and staying away from people in the 90s, you know, it would have been insane. I also want to, you know, bring up another piece in that social media has given us an opportunity to have a closer connection with some of our favorite celebrities, right? And so I think what we're seeing is that, because there's this idea in the Black community that if you have money and celebrity, you're okay, right? Let's talk about, you know, what happened to a dear sister, Tamar Braxton, 24 hours ago, 48 hours ago. This is a sister that, you know, by most people's, especially people of color, by most of our standards, she's a Braxton. She has money. She has fame. She should be okay. Well, it's been reported that her recent hospitalization is almost definitely a suicide attempt. Okay, and so again, that's a perfect example of a person not being able to cope with whatever mental health issues she may be dealing with, in spite of the fact that she has fame, in spite of the fact that she has success, and in spite of the fact that she clearly could afford to speak to any therapist she wants. Another example, and I'm going to try to be serious about this, Kanye West. If he's not an example of somebody that probably needs some talking to, I don't know who is. And yet we laugh at him, we mock him, right? You know, collectively, we think he's a buffoon and a clown. But at the end of the day, there's some real issues with that brother, and we don't take that seriously. But to your credit, Dr. Brandy, what you said, I believe it was Crystal, I'm not really sure. Let it be somebody of a lighter, fairer skin. They'll tell you in a minute, yeah, I go see my therapist, and it's almost celebrated. We don't, not only do we not celebrate the idea of really dealing with mental health the way that we would deal with a broken leg, we don't embrace it at all.
Mhm. Yeah. Thank you for bringing up some of the recent examples for sure of, you know, people who are successful in our community and they're still struggling. And then the thing too, before I bring in Crystal, is how does the media portray that individual struggles? Are they laughing with the person too? Or are they elevating conversations around, if you are struggling, get help? Every article that I've read about Tamar Braxton has not included some of that language. And so that is a problem because, again, that's someone that our young people see and others see on TV. And if that person is struggling, then what does that mean about their life and their situation? And so I'd like to bring in Crystal, because I know she had some comments that she'd like to share around this topic.
Yeah, I wanted to mention as we talk about successful people, but the role that even an interviewer has in that space too. I think of Terrence Howard was being interviewed at the Emmy Awards, the last one that was in person, and he had a full psychotic break on air while being interviewed on the red carpet. And he's talking about like fictitious characters from the universe and all of these types of things. And the interviewer, rather than wrapping that up and saying, okay, you obviously are in a space, you obviously are having a clear psychotic moment, they continue to ask questions. Well, what do you mean by that? To what my mind looked exploitative, to want to get a comment from someone like Terrence Howard, who was coming off of a big Emmy win with Empire, and wanting to exploit that moment. And so I think there's a responsibility there as well. And I think it's so important. I think when we talk about mental health within ourselves, like I myself have been in therapy on and off for 10 years because I knew I needed to address the trauma that I experienced as a kid and what that looks like. And so saying that to my family members or saying that at work can be a really dangerous proposition, because all of a sudden people assume, like in your family, they're like, well, are you crazy? Do you got, oh, you know, your aunt so-and-so used to be this way back in the day. Maybe you got some of that, where it's like, no, hun, like this, like we live generational trauma, and sometimes you need to talk to people. And then I think about at work, they'll see you as a liability or as someone who's incapable of doing the job. And so I think that pushes people away a lot. And like, we cannot have this conversation we're having today without the conversation around healthcare and lack of access to healthcare. Because one thing we don't address in the media is the fact that even though in Massachusetts we have a form of socialized healthcare, it does not touch everyone that needs it. When we talk about methadone mile, when we talk about the homelessness rate, understand that many, if not most of those people, suffer from some form of illness or lack of access to mental health care. And that is why they are where they are. And we never have that conversation when we talk about homelessness numbers. We never have that conversation in press releases when we talk about, oh, we're going to send a bus out to give folks hot cocoa and a blanket. But there's not that conversation about, I'm going to bring this psychologist here to open up a case and lead this person to a path of health and wellness. So I think we have to take a responsibility too, as folks in the media, to ask these questions. If not, who, then us. We need to say, this is nice, but what about this? And when we are in those moments where someone is struggling, we need to say, I'm going to stop this interview here because I think something is wrong, and it would be irresponsible for me to propagate this interview, to propagate this misinformation. And so I think that there has to be a responsibility there. Yes, we all want to get the get. We want that soundbite that we can tease and put in commercials and all that other stuff. I understand that there's money to be made in media, but we cannot do it at the expense of our collective mental health as a society and the trauma that we can also inflict on others who may not have even been exposed to it.
Yeah, there was a lot in that. Thank you so much for all of that. I feel like we need to pass around a collection plate for sure. But I mean, James, you on the floor, laid out, white sheet and all. But a couple of things to kind of unpack with what Crystal just said, and I'd like to hear from James and Keri about this is, when Crystal talked about having a therapist for 10 years, and some of the comments she got back from family and things like that. Can each of you speak to what is that conversation you've had to have when you are the provider of media? Like, you're the one telling people, hey, here are the resources, here's where you go. But then you also have your struggles and how you may deal with that, on a day-to-day basis, and how you again, elevate the importance of it while also taking care of yourself as well. And so, James, I'll go to you first, and then I'll go to Keri afterwards.
They say that hairdressers are the worst at doing their own hair. And I'll just start off by responding to say that by that. I have my way of handling. I say it's seafood. I've been going to a therapist for like maybe 10 years and still have yet to go. And a lot of people, talk about self-care and whatnot. And I have, my ways of managing. I know I'm not even going to look at the comments because some of the folks that are on Java, when we talk about it, they're on now and they're going to be like, wait, what? And I've often said that for me through service, and some people will say it's a cop out, and it's a codependency sort of answer, but my therapy is sort of like through service. If I can make something happen, if I can move the needle, I'll deal with the frustration. I'll deal with the phone calls, texts, and all that, because at the end of the day, it gets something done for the community. So, I mean, yeah, Dr. Brandy, and that I don't have much to say in that space. Well,
how do you say to someone, I'm talking about mental health, but I myself may need to step back and take care of me. So how are you able to have, so you don't?
I honestly, and we, you've been here, we've done this stuff organically in real time. I just don't. And offline, I can tell you there was an incident there was a young man that was killed in 2008. And my phone was off. And ever since that night, it's once in a while, I know I'm at a breaking point. Like, I'll sign off and be like, take the weekend or whatever. But I just don't. There is not there's just so much that's going on that, and I'll be honest, that's a little bit of pride, because sort of the sentiment is, well, if I'm not out there, it won't get done. So let's just name that to be very transparent and real, but I just do, and as long as I got my seafood and have a little Moscato here and there, and can lay out and watch Ratchet TV, for a couple of days in a row, I'm pretty good. So yeah. Dr. Brandy, I'm going to get you later.
So Keri, if you could speak to how, you might be on the radio and people might see you out and about at different events, and then also letting them know, yes, I too struggle and I may need to talk to someone just as you may need to talk to someone, and how you deal with that and walking in both of those spaces.
So I'm grimacing because I guess this is going to be the part of the conversation where we all get deep, or at least I do.
Oops, sorry.
So between 2004 and 2007, I was incarcerated. I went to prison in New York State for identity theft. Last 10 months of that sentence, I was housed in the Attica Correctional Facility, a maximum security facility with people like the son of Sam. It was They shifted me over there because of space issues. But at the end of the day, I had an arsonist on one side of me and a triple murderer on the other side of me. It was a horrific experience, very traumatizing, and I don't think that I really felt that I ever needed to deal with it beyond simply being released. Okay, so that was 2007, January 2nd, when I was released from the Attica Correctional Facility. Fast forward to present day. I can't say that I honestly have a week that goes by without having some kind of nightmare involving me being in custody or incarcerated or being confined. Last night I had one. 2 nights ago I had one. It's pretty regular now that I had, I mean, X amount of years later, and I'm still having nightmares, you know, waking up in sweats. You know, it's horrible, right? How do I deal with that? So last summer, I fought tooth and nail with the New York City Department of Corrections to go to 2 different youth jails, one in the Bronx, one in Brooklyn. Both of them housed the worst of the worst in terms of pre-adults were concerned. I was finally given the opportunity after being vetted and signing all these forms to visit both of the facilities. In the first situation in Brooklyn, I went and talked to basically a whole bunch of kids in a gymnasium. I was separated from the kids with a whole bunch of corrections officers and really didn't have a whole lot of an opportunity to, you know, talk to them one-on-one. When I was invited a couple of months later to go to the other facility in the Bronx, which was actually considered the worst of the 2, I specifically asked the directors if I could go into the housing units of the kids and talk to them one-on-one. I asked, you know, could you get the corrections officers, you know, move them aside or something? A, because I didn't really want to see them uniforms again, and B, because I wanted to have a one-on-one with the kids. And I'm gonna say that, you know, I've talked to friends. I've even talked to my mom, who was suggesting, Keri, you need to go talk to somebody. And though I think that they're right, like Jim, service has helped me to be able to go into the prisons, you know, and talk about the Keri's Corner radio show and talk about the books that I've written, not from a braggadocious perspective at all, but to say, hey, you know what? You guys are locked down right now. So wasn't I 10 X amount of years ago. If I can get out of here and do what I've done, you can do the same thing. And I think that nothing thus far has been as therapeutic for me, Dr. Brandy, as being able to share my experiences with people that really need to hear it. So I've spoken at colleges in New York City. I've spoken at high schools in New York City, and that's great. But to talk to the kids that really need to hear that, those tend to be the situations where I get better sleep. So using my platform to reach out to kids and adults who have experienced or are experiencing what I went through, that seems to be my coping mechanism. So to be able to use my platform in a more organic way, not just to talk about it over the air or to write about it in the magazine, but to go to these people and say, hey, I was where you are, you know, and offer internships and all that. That's basically been my way of coping and utilizing my platform to help myself.
Well, Keri, I would say I appreciate you for going deep, because somebody out there needed to hear that, not just the young men that you work with in the prisons. And so I'd like to shift to Crystal for a second. I know she had some thoughts on kind of the things that were just now shared. And then I have one last kind of commenting question, and before we wrap it up and see if there are any questions from any of the audience who've been listening. So Crystal, I'll turn it over to you really quickly.
Yes, I'll be brief. And I'm sure that, you know, Jimmy and Keri are gifts to their community. I will say that service can be taxing on the soul too. And that can also deplete us. And so what I like to practice is silence and surrender. So sitting in silence for five minutes a day and just watching everything come in. and checking in where you are and surrendering to those feelings. And as scary and as difficult as they are, I think when we can name a thing, we can deal with the thing. And then moving on from that space, it allows me to practice a lot of self-awareness. How am I feeling? Why am I angry? What's my agitation in this moment? Does it come from the thing that's in front of me, or does it come from a thing in my past that is behind me, that's trying to snatch me back from the place of wellness and health that I am in now? And then also creating the spaces where I feel safe, whether I do that through expressing my boundaries, whether I do that with becoming a whole person before I enter into a relationship, whether that be romantic or with friends, and making sure that every space that I walk into, I create a safe spot for me. So I think that practicing those things are really important. I think service is so important because it allows us to give ourselves another form of perspective, but it also allows us a little bit, if we're honest, a little bit of escapism to come outside of ourselves. And while it is noble, it is taxing on the spirit. And so I just hope that, for everyone out there, while you practice that service, because we need you all, we need you, Jimmy, we need you, Keri, just take a moment for yourselves and look inside and nurture your spirit, because I think that that's so important. And it's not some hippy dippy yoga stuff like folks like my auntie would tell me. It is the thing that will carry us through to break the generational curses of trauma.
That's beautiful. And so I'd like to just ask James, Keri, if you have any last thoughts, last comments around your own self-care practices, or better yet, how you, going forward from today with everything going on, plan to use your platform to continue these conversations. And so I'll ask if you have any last comments, last thoughts, and then I'll ask Robin to turn it over for any questions that we may have received from our listening audience. You're muted. Muted.
Listen, me, Mr. Digital Director, because Crystal just like wore me out. And I mean, I knew that, and she didn't do it the way I thought some folks would comment and do. And somebody did chime in on my comments. I don't know if you saw, Robin, and said that, service, and Crystal did sort of affirm that with the sort of caveat of warning that don't do that too much. And you said escapism, something like that. So it is, mental health is interesting in itself. And I just wanted to name a couple of things, I guess, in closing to highlight. Crystal, you were on point that sort of society still views media still portrays that resilient big mama. She's going to Aunt your mama, back in the black and whites, she was heavy set, dark skin, and had the little, on her head. And slowly over time, Claire and others, that's still, so to that point, that was my thought. And then at some point, maybe Toy, we can talk about doing a panel just on resilience, because resilience is not as wonderful. We're a resilient community. There's such a resilient people. No, you know how we become resilient? To constantly be bombarded with crap that we have to build a tougher skin and coping mechanisms to. So that part. And then I guess the last thing, Crystal, I would say that was helpful to me, to your question, Brandy, about self-care. So behind here, I've been doing it for a week, but I had a self-care spot in my office. And I realized that that's not the best place for my self-care place to be. It needs to be in the bedroom. So this is like this because we're under construction kind of a little bit. So I am going to be more intentional about self-care, protecting my time, because this service is taxing. One of my board members told me, and can we keep it real, Crystal and Keri and Toy, you're doing this to some level, and Dr. Brandy too, is your field, but the accessibility in this space that we allow ourselves, Crystal talk about, protecting your spirit and whatnot. They told me, they said, not only is it some level of busy work, but the lanes in which, in the environments and spaces all around trauma, poverty, I didn't get this, can you help me with that? bills and whatnot. So I am looking, Dr. Brandy, to be more intentional. I am going to one day make one of them appointments. But for now, it is the service, the seafood, the Moscato, and laying on the couch and watching Ratchet TV over the weekend, or old school, like old shows. Thanks, Crystal. I'm going to find Mr. Curry and them on Netflix or somewhere. I'm done. Again, Toy, thank you.
I think it's Hulu.
Is it
on
Hulu or somewhere? But I got all of them with this darn Rona. So,
but Keri, I don't know if you have any last thoughts thinking about self-care and how, either this conversation or some of the things going on, kind of makes you want to continue conversations around Black mental health and how you want to do that in the future.
I definitely will be completely honest and say that just being a part of this conversation was extremely therapeutic. Listening to what Crystal had to say, what Jimmy had to say. I mean, it just to have a conversation about mental health in and of itself is very, very good for mental health. It's while I was in prison, and Toy, you know me, I wouldn't be me if I didn't take the opportunity to promote something. So while I was in prison, one of the things that I did to cope with all of the things that I was dealing with was I wrote poems. And so I recently, my third book is a poetry book that I released. It's backwards, but it's there. No, seriously, my third book is called Journey. The poems is a collection of 30 poems that I wrote while I was incarcerated. And it was very therapeutic for me to release this, because it's kind of like I can let this off and I can share with other people, because it wasn't just, the poems are not just a collective of my experiences in jail. They're a collective of my experiences my entire life, things that I've experienced way before incarceration and afterwards. So poetry, that was my escapism in prison, and one that I decided to take from that experience and share with others. Sharing is very important in terms of dealing with mental health. I think that, again, as people of color, we do keep our issues to ourselves, our personal issues. We keep them to ourselves. We don't share. And just like anything else that you keep bottled up, it's combustible, it'll explode. So I think that it's important to talk. If you're not comfortable with talking to somebody professionally, find somebody outside of your family circle that can be neutral and somebody that you can talk to. Reach out to people like Toy. Toy, you are amazing. You've given so much of yourself to benefit other people, not with just the parade and DeeDee's cry, but just conversations. I mean, that is so important. And speaking of conversations, my new television show, I don't know. Anyway, Sessions Cafe, where I will be actually interviewing guests. Unlike the radio show, it is a therapeutic type of a situation where I'll invite people, homeless children, to come on to the show, domestic violence survivors, homicide survivors like myself, to come on to the show and just have a candid conversation. Not an on the couch situation, but a very candid situation where we're talking and we're sharing. And I think that's super important.
And so, Robin, I'll turn it over to you to see if there were any audience questions or reactions or comments.
Sure, thank you. Let me just scroll up and around. There were a few comments. Let's see. Sharon, self-care. Let's see. Doing service is a way to manage mental health care. Thank you. Sharon also said she's being trained to be a mental health coach soon. Antonio, Athletes in Service to America was one of the original platforms from Sport and Society at Northeastern. Antonio is an NU alum, I assume. Let's see. And again, Marianne is thanking you all for your transparency, as we all are thanking you. Self-care, mind, body, soul, spirit. I agree. Hearing people be vulnerable is very helpful. And again, this is about conversations. That is probably the first form of therapy. Before they were professionals, they were family members. There was the village where we all came from, and we all have our historical knowledge of. There was the village, and there was the wise elders who we sat and talked with. So don't forget, you still have your own elders within your circles. They don't necessarily have to be your own family, but there are elders all around you. And sometimes it has nothing to do with age. It's all about wisdom. So remember the youth that are around you, because you will learn, and you will also understand what's important in life. Also, Antonio says, what would advertising self-care posters at slades and churches look like? Meet them where they are or frequent. Oh, I see. So he's saying perhaps the city or some of us in the field could have advertising self-care posters at slades or at churches and where people congregate, where our people congregate. Thank you for that comment, Antonio. And Sharon says, yes, conversation is first.
Yeah, conversation is very important. And I think, you know, one thing I'd like to echo, which has been stated by everyone, is that because we do a lot in the community and for our community, it is very important to continue to take care of our community, but also remember to take care of ourselves. Because I was talking to a friend the other day who is a clinician, and she shared kind of this analogy with me. She said, you know, you have to imagine as though it's like a garden, and you know, we all need water to sustain us, but your soil is different. Different soils need different nutrients in order to grow the plant. You know, and so what she was saying is that, you know, and she was reminding me too, is that Brandy, remember your soil. Remember, you still have to till it. You still have to give it a little bit of love every day. While it's great that you're out there watering other plants and you're making sure, you know, the conditions are right for others, you still have to maintain your own soil in order to grow fruit. And then what, Keri, you're saying yes. Oh, but no, you have to do this, and you have to be intentional about it, and you need to give the space for it. And so I'd like to turn to Toy, who brought us all together, who is kind of the glue to all of us connecting this evening and having this conversation with you. I'd like to turn to Toy and ask her to close us out if she would. Toy?
Okay. For those of you who may have came in the middle, my name is Toy Burton, and I am the founder and executive director of DeeDee's Cry. And I just want to thank everyone for being on the panel. Thank you, Robin, for being host. Thank you, Dr. Brandy, for being moderator. Yes, Roxbury all day, Keri. And like with DeeDee's Cry, what I always say is that the more we share our story, the more we chip away at the stigma that surrounds mental health in communities of color. We want people to know that they're not alone, that we all go through this at some point in our lives. And even though sometimes we can't see the end of the storm, we are here to tell you that the sun does come out, that we do make it through our challenges, and we do overcome. And I would just like to say thank you for tuning in. Like DeeDee's Cry on the Facebook page. I can't even think of the Twitter handle. No, not even Twitter, Instagram, DeeDee's Cry on Instagram. Yes. And the website will be done soon, and that will be deedescry.com. And on there, you'll be able to support what we are doing. Please follow us, join DeeDee's Cry group. And again, thank you guys for sharing yourselves to help others. July is Minority Mental Health Month. This is our series, Black Mental Health Matters. Next week, we'll be doing it again. And please join us next Saturday. We'll have an awesome discussion. And again, thank you, everyone.
And before everyone out there in Facebook land leaves us, just want to mention the sponsors for the night as well. And thank you, Toy. I want to thank Louis D. Brown Peace Institute, Eastern Bank, and the Boston Foundation, Callaway Graphics for the flyers. Don't forget, tomorrow, Sunday, July 19th, is Roxbury Unity Parade Day, and that's an event created by Toy and DeeDee's Cry. That's happening tomorrow. Again, the parade itself will be a motorcade this year because of Rona. So if you haven't registered, and can people still register, Toy?
No, registration is closed.
Okay, registration is closed. So if you do see cars driving around with things on them in Roxbury, that is the Roxbury Unity Parade 2020 motorcade. So please be out there and wave at them. And also want to just say in regards to tonight's event, talking about media, that even though all of us are not professionals, we do have professionals here tonight. Not all of us are professionals or even amateurs, but believe it or not, we are all media makers, okay? So please remember that, because we all are walking around with this mini computer, which also has an amazing video and picture capability. And we're taking pictures and creating media, and then we're posting it. Even people as young as 10 years old, children as young as 10, 8, 9 have these cell phones. Elders as old as 85, 90 have these cell phones, and we're all taking pictures, posting, and creating media. So we have to be aware. I'm gonna be aware. I hope you are gonna be aware of what you're posting, what it is that you're saying, and who you're sharing it with on all of those platforms. We all have a responsibility. And also, as Dr. Brandy reminded us tonight, can I just say one more thing? As Brandy reminded us, since media doesn't tell us what to think, but it tells us what to think about, I'm gonna let you know what I'm gonna think about tonight, tomorrow, next week, and probably beyond that. I'm thinking about the US Rep John Lewis and all the societal issues that he fought for during his lifetime. And I'm praying and hoping, and I believe in my heart that his family is surrounded by loving memories of him and his fight for freedom for all of us in this country, including Black lives. So I'm gonna be thinking about what I can do to make sure that his death is not in vain. And so tonight, tomorrow, and beyond, I'm curious what you all are gonna be thinking about.
Thank you. Anybody else have anything to say? Yes, Chris.
Just because it's tomorrow, I'll be thinking about the Roxbury Unity Parade.
Tonight, we bring you one more reminder about the very first Roxbury Unity Parade, the event scheduled for Sunday afternoon, 12 to 4 p.m., and starting from Malcolm X Boulevard near Dudley Square. We'd like to welcome back the founder and executive director, Toy Burton. Thank you very much for being with us, Toy.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris.
I want to backtrack a little bit to what got you started on trying to have this parade.
Okay, so I noticed that other communities have celebrations, showing their pride, Dorchester Day, the Rosendale Parade. And at a time last summer, there was a lot of violence in the city, and I felt like that we needed something to bring us together, to unite us, and to show the good parts of Roxbury, the good in Roxbury.
Now, this is the first time out. There are some big parades around the city. You got to start somewhere.
Yes.
I guess this is going to be working up. So what kind of an event is this going to be in terms of what people are going to see coming down Washington Street? Okay,
well, first from 10 to 12, I call it the parade celebration. So from 10 to 12, the face painting will be there. There'll be music, and just to get people gathering. And then at 12:15, the opening ceremony is going to begin, and certain community members will win awards that the community voted on them to win. And then at 1 o'clock, we will step off and head over to Malcolm X Park.
I'm going to get you, James.
Perfect, James.
I'm
Wonderful.
like trying to type it like I am going to get you.
That was
Your mic is off, so we couldn't hear your comment.
Oh, sorry. That was a surprise for Toy. The format has changed a little bit this year, and you'll be around to hear about it tomorrow. But I just thought we would sort of, my debut as digital director formally, just throw that out there real quick.
All right now. All right now.
Thank you, everybody. Are we
right.
good?
We're good. Thank you, everyone, for joining and tuning in. Again, like DeeDee's Cry on Facebook, on Instagram, and the soon-to-be live DeeDee'sCry.com website. Go on, donate,
Awesome.
and check out some of the information on there. Have a great night, and
Night.
continue the work that you all do.
Yes, thank you. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.